Resources Committee. The usual protocols apply. Keep yourself on mute if you're not talking, and indicate in the chat if you wish to come in. So item 1 is apologies, substitutions on declaration of interest. Do we have any apologies or substitutions?
Convener, there are no apologies were submitted. Are there any declarations of interest?
Councillor Clockerty, have you got a declaration of interest?
Just in Inverclyde Ledger.
Okay.
Convener, can I just send apologies for Louise Long, please? Alan Stevenson here.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Okay, any other declaration of interest? No. Okay, thanks for that. So that takes us on to item 2, which is the COVID-19 update, and I think Martin's going to take us through this report.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Convener. You'll see that this report bears out the perils of doing this kind of stuff too far in advance and then going off on a week's holiday. So in general, I think you'll probably see in section 4.1 sort of the general background that at the time I wrote this, that the picture in Greater Glasgow and Clyde was actually very rosy. And as we're all very well aware that things have taken a bit of a turn for the worse since then. So just to give you a kind of general idea of the kind of current position, our current rate at the moment stands around about 4. It will probably go up tomorrow because I think there were 3 cases yesterday which don't appear in the stats yet, and will go up, but it will still be below 10. So we are still in quite a good place. Having said that, the overall Scottish rate, which was at 18 at the time, is now at 45 cases per 100,000, and the GGC overall rate is now at 103. So things generally not so good, and the Renfrewshire rate, which was 9.5 cases, is now round about 90. So that's rocketed up in the last 4 or 5 days. Glasgow rate's about 140. The one thing that seems to be reassuring about this is that the bulk of the cases seem to be in younger age groups, with the result that they're not necessarily having the same effect on hospitalisations. And if you had the chance to maybe catch the First Minister, that seemed to be reflected in what she was saying this today. The downside of this can be that, certainly from talking to colleagues in other authorities, that they're now seeing a lot of cases in their schools. So at the moment, we are slightly protected from that because we've not seen those increases. We've not had, to the best of our knowledge, any cases of what's the so-called Indian variant, or April 02, I think it's also called by Scottish Government. We haven't been informed of any cases of that variant, which might reflect why our case rate's still quite low. What we might see, though, is if it does get in, we might see more disruption to schooling, etc. The vaccination programme overall has continued apace, and at the moment, for the Inverclyde adult population, 74% have had a first dose and 43% have had a second dose. And that compares quite well with Scottish rates of 70 for first dose, 42 for second dose, and GGC overall rates of 66 for first dose and 36 for second dose. Members will be aware that I also circulated earlier at the end of last week, a document showing the kind of levels of did not attend in Inverclyde. And at the moment, we are looking at a level of around about, I think it was 6.9, which is broadly comparable with other authorities in Greater Glasgow and Clyde, albeit Glasgow is quite markedly higher at around about 12. I did ask today if there was any more intelligence about the sort of reports in the media on the did not attends at the Hydro and whether there was any particular reason for those. And there's nothing known as yet as to the reasons for that. One element might be, though, that younger age groups are obviously now being invited for first doses, and we have seen an increase in did not attends as you go down the age groups. So there's a slight increase between everything's very good above 60. There's a slight increase for 55 to 60s. There's another slight increase for 50 to 55. And I think that is continuing down the age groups where the numbers not attending has increased. We are expecting to have a meeting with the Health Board imminently to have a chat about whether there are any areas in Inverclyde, or not necessarily geographical areas, but population that we need to concentrate on. So that's a kind of overall picture. In terms of the rest of the report, section 6 is the usual update on workforce issues and the current absence rates and the historical absence rates since the start of the pandemic. Section 7 is an update on the support for business and the payments made to date. 8 is a bit more detail on the vaccination strategy, and on that one I probably ought to also mention that we're also looking at, with the Health Board, at planning for potential need for booster vaccinations later in the year. The Health Board, as you'll be aware, there's going to be a trial in Scotland of third doses between now and September, and that will give them an idea of whether there is a need for a booster and what the benefits of a booster will be. So there is planning going ahead, though, on the assumption that that might happen, and that if it does, that those will be combined with potentially with the flu jab delivery. Section 9 gives details on testing. At the moment, we are still running at Bogelston. We still have the 2 symptomatic test sites. And I did say that in my report in 9.2 that by the time committee meets, we should be able to offer home testing kits under the universal offer. We have had some issues with deliveries, but I'm hoping we'll be able to do that imminently at Bogelston. And if anybody needs to collect test kits, LFT test kits, then those are available at Crawfordsburn in the afternoons. Section 10 of the report's an update on the Community Renewal Fund and the application process for that. Section 11 covers salary sacrifice shared costs and the additional voluntary contribution scheme, and there's a recommendation round about that section. Section 12 is an update on the Council's health and wellbeing strategy, and section 13 is an update on the jobs recovery plan. So in terms of recommendations, let's get to the relevant page. So it's recommended that the committee notes the update on the Community Renewal Fund, and notes that the approval process may be by the use of the emergency powers process, and this purely relates to the timing of the application process to the UK government. Recommendation 3.3 is to approve an amendment to the Council's pensions discretions policy to apply an available discretion to introduce the salary sacrifice shared cost additional voluntary contribution scheme, as this brings savings both for the member and for the council. And the 3.4 and 3.5 are to note the update on the health and wellbeing strategy and the progress on the Inverclyde jobs recovery plan. Happy to take any questions, or the relevant sort of lead officers will do so.
Okay, thanks for that, Martin. Before I open up to questions, Tommy, you're wanting to declare an interest. You're on mute, Tommy. That should be you now. I'm not hearing you, Tommy. Well, I'll just ask Colin to record the declaration of interest in respect of the business grants section, and Councillor McVeigh is a taxi operator, so he's just declaring an interest. But that item's just for noting, so there's no need for him obviously to leave the meeting. Okay, so I've got a number of questions, so rather than just go through it section by section, I'll just take them as they come and see how we go on. It could end up being a bit of a disaster, but we'll try our best to get through it. So Ronnie, I think you're first.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Just one topic from me at the moment, anyway, and it's about the Community Renewal Fund, 10.12 and 3. I think, as the report kind of highlights, the deadlines here are really suicidal. You know, in terms of submissions to the fund, they have to be lodged by the 4th of June. And I think the notes here suggest that we will have some kind of feedback by the 18th of June. Okay, that's difficult, and I can understand why perhaps there would have to be emergency powers for submission of these things. But the one thing that really bugs me big time is the fact that it says that the UK government has indicated they will let applicants know late in 2021. Now, if it's going to be November or December of this year, and given that the projects have to be completed by the 31st of March 2022, that would mean if you have a successful bid, basically, and it is 90% revenue and 10% capital, that you basically only have 3 months to complete a project. Now, depending on the scope and the scale of the application that you submit, it could well be £1 million. It could be even more than £1 million. So the reality here is that a successful applicant basically has got 3 months to complete the project that they have been given grant aid for, or potentially given grant aid for. I mean, what's their officers' feelings on this? I mean, do they think it's achievable, or any comments on that? Because, you know, obviously our team are having a real close look at this. But I just wanted to clarify this point, if you don't mind. Thanks.
Yeah, bring Stuart in on that. Stuart?
Through you, Chair. Councillor Alfield's absolutely right. The Community Renewal Fund is a notional allocation to Inverclyde of up to £3 million. It is a UK government scheme, and we're playing by the UK government rules of engagement, I'm afraid. We are hopeful that, just a point of clarity, the 18th of June date, Councillor Alfield, is the submission date by the Council as the gatekeeper to UK government, as opposed to providing you with feedback on your projects. Obviously, we'll advise members or applicants whether they have been endorsed by the Council or not. I'm afraid we're in a situation where we could be spending up to £3 million in a quarter of a year. We are hopeful that the UK government will turn around the decision-making process quicker than that, but we have to be open and transparent with members and point out that the fund may require to be spent within a period of 3 months, and recognising that's a very, very tough ask, but that's what we're faced with.
You want to come back in on that, Ronnie?
Yeah, I mean, Stuart's probably just endorsed, you know, what we thought about that. And I think, you know, from our perspective, that we will have to be extremely careful that what we potentially would be submitting to the fund could be achievable within those three months. But I can tell you that it's extremely difficult to do that. But appreciate the clarification. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Stephen.
I mean, I think we often face challenges like this with time-limited funding. Sometimes the goalposts are moved a bit later on if there's a national issue with this, potentially it might be a matter of the funding being committed, not necessarily spent before the 31st of March. But at this point in time, we've got to go on the basis of the rules as they stand and not necessarily anticipate that happening. So you're absolutely right. It's challenging, no doubt about that. Okay, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. My question's actually on testing. I was at a health board meeting early this morning where Alaska was giving us an update on where we are in Greater Glasgow and Clyde Sense. And again, she did mention that Inverclyde is very much on the lower side compared to our surrounding areas. One of the things she did mention was testing, and she was talking about testing within the schools and the teacher environment. And she says it's very, very low for pupils, well under 10%, and we're not getting the message through to teachers either. And I'm just wondering, it's probably more to Ruth, and obviously I could have taken it offline with this, but I think this is the best place to actually ask it, since it's a general question. Where are we with testing with our pupils, Ruth? And probably more importantly, have we got the same problem with our teachers as well?
I mean, just before I bring Ruth in, I mean, I do see the comparative stats across the country on a weekly basis as a member of the Education Recovery Group, and I mean, the take-up of pupils is relatively low. Staff is reasonable, but could be higher. We do tend to be at the lower end of the scale in both, but it is a common issue across the country. It's not unique to Inverclyde. Ruth?
Through convener, I was about to say exactly the same thing. I've seen the same stats, and yes, it's not as much as we'd like to be. Also, the fact that it can change as well, and people seem to be almost weary of it. We've put something out to remind pupils, and we've also made videos to some of the head teachers have made videos as to how to test. We can put something out again, but yes, we're not the worst by far. But we're certainly not at the top end either. We're along with our comparator authorities, I would say, but it's not where we would want to be, certainly.
I mean, I think in terms of the workforce, we could potentially look at a joint message with the trade unions out to the workforce, but I think we also need to think of a message to parents and pupils as well, just to encourage as much uptake as we can. Do you want to come back on that, Jim?
No, that's fine, Stephen. Thanks, and thanks, Ruth.
Okay, Chris.
Thanks. I mean, just on section 10 and section 11. Basically, section 10, I was just wondering about transparency, about what the actual bids are going to be. I was just wondering how much do we anticipate will be council bids, and how much do we anticipate will be from community bids? And note that what they call it, that it's going to be maybe emergency powers. I'm just wondering, again, going back to transparency thing, how will we as council members know what's the proposals are going to be? And the second one on section 11, the salaries sacrifice. I'm just wondering, it seems to be talking about additional voluntary contribution aspects of the pension. Can officers confirm to yourself, convener, whether or not there's salary sacrifice on the main pension contributions, and is there any, if there's not, is there any sort of rationale for why that's not happening?
Okay, Stuart first.
Through you, convener. In terms of governance, councillor, the simple situation is that we've put in place appropriate governance to deal with this. Namely, the regeneration manager is leading in the process associated with the submission and collation of bids from everybody involved in the process. So I have no involvement in that process, which affords me the opportunity to make council bids, but those council bids will be scored by an independent panel comprising 3 members of staff at service manager level, and from our perspective, we're quite comfortable that the transparency will be applied to the process. All of the bids that are submitted to the regeneration manager will be presented to members via the emergency powers, along with the scoring, so that they can see absolutely that there's absolutely no concerns from a governance perspective.
Just to confirm, Stuart, the emergency powers report will then subsequently be reported to committee.
Through you, convener, absolutely.
Okay. You okay with that, Chris, before we move on to the next one? Can't hear you, Chris, you're muted.
I suppose it's just me wanting to copy nose. I would like to know what our council bids are before it goes to emergency powers, I suppose. But
You can have a chat with Stuart offline as the generation spokesperson for your political group.
Yes, I will do. The other thing, just on the salary sacrifice aspect.
Yeah, I'm going to bring Stephen in and that.
Thank you, convener. Through yourself. Yeah, I'm actually glad. I've actually got Bobby McEwen, who's our payroll manager, with us, who might be able to add to this, or maybe even answer the question better than myself in terms of how pension contributions are actually currently paid. So maybe if I could, through you, convener, if I could ask maybe Bobby to come in on this one.
Okay, Bobby.
Yep, thank you. The current legislation requires us to calculate contribution rates per employee, and that's based on the earnings at 1st of April. Salary sacrifice isn't included within that legislation. The legislation that we're looking at here is in relation to a discretions policy, which allows each employer to decide whether or not they would go with salary sacrifice shared cost AVCs. So there's no salary sacrifice effectively with your main pension contributions. You're required to pay national insurance on your full earnings. You do get tax relief on the main scheme, but there's no national insurance relief for your main contributions.
Just to clarify on that, Bobby, there certainly used to be contracted in and contracted out rates of national insurance. Does that still apply?
No, that you were contracted out of the state earnings related pension scheme, but that disappeared quite a number of years ago.
Right. So you're still paying national insurance contributions
Yes.
on your main pension contributions?
Yes. There's no difference in whether you're in the pension scheme or not. Every employee will pay the same national insurance if their earnings are the same, other than any employee over a certain age. You get tax relief.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Chris, you happy with that free tax advice?
Yeah, well, it's not so much that, it's just that obviously I'm quite surprised that local council employees don't seem to have the same access to the benefits that maybe private sector employees have, because I've got a private income from another company, and we do salary sacrifice, so I don't pay national insurance on my pension account. So I'm surprised there's actually legislative things that bars us as our employees from actually taking advantage of the same thing. I'm just wondering if that's the case, can we not sort of do something to try and rectify the situation? Because it's obviously makes no difference to us, but it's a big difference to our employees.
My pension expert, Councillor Clotty, is shaking his head there a wee bit, but I don't know, Bob, if you want to comment on that.
In relation to the pension scheme that you're referring to, Councillor, I'm really not sure what the legislation with that would be. Certainly from the local government pension scheme's point of view, it's been reviewed twice over the last 20 years. It was reviewed in 2009 and again reviewed in 2015. The salary sacrifice element of it came in 2015. But I recognise that there's quite a lot of different pension schemes and different rules that are in there.
So just go back to my initial point. So on your main pension contributions, you can salary sacrifice them at current, and that's why the question was confirming, because this is all about AVCs. I was just confirming that was the case.
Sorry, you can't salary sacrifice on your main pension contributions. You can on your AVCs.
So that seems to be a bit of a problem then for local government employees, because they're then paying national insurance on money that a private employee wouldn't be spending money on. And that's my concern is there something we can do that actually reduces increase the cost, increase the take home pay for our employees? If there's a legal impediment for us doing that, we should maybe be asking if we can get that legal impediment stopped, or get rid of that legal impediment.
Okay, well, we can maybe ask Stephen to take that up with his colleagues through your network, and maybe come back on that at some point to Councillor Curley or other members.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, Stephen.
Okay, right, moving on. Robert, you got a question?
Aye, thank you, Convener. My question is on the health and wellbeing strategy. And I know we've spoke to the employees, but I've been alarmed with the amount of employees are telling me they're now being affected what's known as long COVID. And I don't see it been mentioned anywhere in this report. I did bring up to the meeting Monday. And is this a problem that we're aware of? And are we taking steps to mitigate any problems going forward? Because it seems to be there's not a lot known about this particular problem, but it is very prevalent. And I think as an employer, when we talk to about the well-being, mental health well-being, I think there should be something done on the long COVID issue, and maybe Alan would be better placed to answer this. So that would be my question: be what we're doing on the long COVID strategy, which seems to be something that's going to be very prevalent.
Okay, we'll bring Stephen in first, and if he needs Alan's professional expertise, we'll bring him in. Stephen?
Thanks, Convener, through you. Thank you, Councillor Moran. We are aware of this being an issue. Fortunately, at this stage, we are dealing with very small numbers of employees that are potentially impacted by this. There is a lot of research going on at the moment and clinical advice being obtained around different ailments that might be linked to long COVID. But we are doing everything that we can to support any of our employees that are perhaps suffering long COVID or any other illness that might be linked to having COVID. There's also discussions at a national level, Councillor Moran, around looking at some of our policies, particularly around sickness absence policies, and where special leave could apply as opposed to sickness allowance at this stage, pending, so that to try and sort of aim for minimising any financial detriment to any employee that perhaps might be suffering from long COVID. But this is something that we're well aware of. We're speaking to the trade unions locally and nationally about how we can best support our employees. And what we are trying to get is a national sort of a solution to this, so that there is a consistent application in terms of how we're treating our employees that may well be suffering from this. But I think the difficulty is it is something new, and there's still a lot of research going on at the moment. But our priority is obviously supporting employees that perhaps are suffering from long COVID, and supporting them back to work if we possibly can, and being as flexible as we can. And that's the approach we've been taking at the moment. But we are certainly less than a handful of employees that perhaps are within our own council that are sort of citing long COVID as a potential reason for absence at this moment in time. But you're absolutely right, it could well be something that is going to increase as time goes on, and that's why we're looking for maybe a more national solution and approach to sort of terms and conditions around it for people who might be suffering from long COVID. Thank you.
Okay, you okay with that, Robert?
That's a quite good answer. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Okay, right. John, you've now got 3 questions. We'll maybe just take them one at a time, John.
That's fine. That's the way I was going to suggest that would be the best way forward. So
yeah,
since you're on that, Convener, the first one basically is I would like to really thank the CRMT and the LRMT teams for the sterling work that they've been doing, and that has ensured that Inverclyde has lost the tag of COVID capital, and whilst that was unwarranted and the COVID is still with us, Martin was correct with what he had said there about the figures that he gave, and because the COVID knows no boundaries and the boundaries keep changing. We saw Glasgow, which at one stage there was the highest in Scotland, had actually surpassed Moray. We also know that figures for Renfrewshire are in the increase as well. Whether any of this has been associated to the mass rallies that we had in Glasgow, i.e. you say Ibrox along the banks of the Clyde, George Square, whether that plays any part in it or not. I just want to know, is there any kind of incubation period so that we could maybe measure that against the return of supporters to the only kind of mass event we had here, and that would be at Capello?
Okay, Mark, I don't know if 500 at Caplo was a mass event, but there was a crowd on the embankment across the road, mind you.
There was, yes.
So,
Martin?
right. So I'll try and deal with those in order. I think firstly, I maybe have to say we have to be very careful that we don't take any credit for reducing rates, because if we do that, we have to take the blame when they go back up. So I'll be careful about that. I think it might just be our luck rather than anything else. But on the subject of kind of mass events, I actually did ask that question this morning in a meeting, just to see, because a certain amount of time has now gone by since those mass events in Glasgow. And at this point, what the health board are saying is that they have no evidence that there's of increases that they can tie in any way to those events. It doesn't mean that there won't have been some cases, but there's nothing that they can say, well, look, here we've got an increase and that's what we can tie it to. I think the far bigger increases that they're seeing and the main issues that they're seeing around about adjoining authorities are more to do with people mixing in houses rather than, you know, household meetings, etc. There's no evidence at the moment as to whether either the kind of Rangers demonstration or any other outdoor events have actually produced anything. As I say, it doesn't mean that there isn't an effect. It just means that either the evidence for it is masked by the far bigger increases round about the Indian variant, or there's not a lot to see. And there has been this statement for some time that or this view for some time that outdoor spread is far less common than indoor spread. So it may be that there's some, but there's nothing that they can put their finger on at this point.
I mean, it is worth remembering that we're coming up for 3 weeks since the biggest mass event that's taken place in recent months, which is the Scottish Parliament elections, where people are actually also indoor as well as queuing outdoor, and nearly 2 million people went out to vote. So there may be some impact from that event. We don't know. Okay, you okay in that, John? You want to move on?
I'm fine. I'm quite happy with that. Yeah. Could you just move on to number 5, really, where it says support for businesses? It's just one very, very quick question where it mentions about the number of significant schemes that are now closed and that there's final appeals and reviews taking place. I just want to know if there's any figures are available for the number of appeals and the outcome of the reviews.
Okay, Alan or Stuart?
If it's okay, convener, I'll take that one. We don't have any figures to hand. I know the numbers are very small in terms of appeals that find their way to me. There's an internal process from my team leader and manager initially, where it's a combination of inquiry and appeal, and then if individuals are still unhappy with the ruling that they've been given, then I will get involved. But we're talking a handful. In the last couple of months, we're gradually closing these final ones off. But I'm more than happy to ask Tracy Bunton to pull together a note on how many appeals we're actually talking about that found its way to me in the context of the thousands and thousands of payments that have been made.
Okay, Alan, that's fine. That's lovely. Thank you.
Right, John, you want to move on to your final question?
The last one basically is really just noting the geographical location of the Park Lee, Bogleston Community Centre and the Crawfordsburn. And it's just to say that they are all roughly within, you would say, like a 1.5 mile radius. And that is ideal for people in Port Glasgow, East End of Greenock. But what about the other geographical areas of Inverclyde? And should the figures at any of these locations drop, should we be looking at other locations that would serve, say, the likes of Gourock, southwest of Greenock, and the villages along the Clyde coast?
I'm afraid, John, that's entirely down to me. I've insisted officers locate these facilities in Port Glasgow and East End of Greenock. and to support my constituents in Kilmacombe as well. No, I'm only kidding, Martin.
So I think it had always been, I suppose there's a couple of things here. One is that it's quite difficult to move you can move an MTU about, but you still need to have a certain amount of facilities for it. And it's quite difficult to also move about the walk-in centre at Crawfordsburn, because it needs quite a big footprint, and there was actually a surprising amount of work had to be done on Crawfordsburn to make it suitable. We have tried testing in other areas. We've had testing up at St Andrews in Larkfield, and we've had testing in Gourock. So the MTU spent some time in St Andrews and before it went to Partlea. I think what I'd probably say overall is that given our current low numbers, we'll keep an eye on this. If we became aware that there were increasing numbers of cases in, say, the Larkfield area or Inverkip and Williams-Bay, and that was seated in the community, then we'd be looking to actually address that by directed testing there. And whether that meant actually MTUs or whether that meant resiting the site we've got in Boggleston, then that would be done. But at the moment, I suppose there's nothing to suggest that there's any better place to put them at the moment, so we've not really moved them. What I can say is that in terms of outbreaks and in terms of numbers increasing rapidly, Glasgow, I think, over the last couple of weeks has had an additional 8 MTUs set up, 6 of which are in the south side. So you can see that actually there is sort of national drives to actually put these things in the right place. And they've also obviously done all the door-to-door distribution of both PCRs and LFTs to households, and they've started another testing site at the mosque. So I think what we're seeing overall is that the capacity in the country as a whole has increased, and there's probably a bit more flexibility. But because of our relatively low rates, we've kind of just been keeping an eye on it. It's been more steady as it goes, and I'm not sure that shifting them just for the sake of it is necessarily the best idea.
So no, the case, Martin, if you want a test, you can phone up and get a test sent to you.
So you can certainly, in terms of the lateral flow devices, yes, you can phone. There's a national number that you can phone, and they'll send you packs of 7 of these so that you've got a supply of them, and anyone can do that. You can also get pick these up at Crawfordsburn, and in due course, when we get the proper delivery, we will also have those available at Boggleston, but we don't as yet. So yes, you can. You can't get PCRs that way at the moment, but we are, as I think I've probably said in previous reports, we are quite well equipped for PCRs, having 2 sites, the MTU every second day and Crawfordsburn. Compared to some areas, I know the likes of Eastern Bartonshire, for example, didn't have any testing up until quite recently. So we've been relatively well served.
Okay, John, you want to come back in?
There's not really too much to add. I'll just kind of focus on the one word that was used, and that was the word review. So if there's any localised spikes in whichever area of Inverclyde, as long as that is kept under review and actioned accordingly, that would be fine.
Yeah, that's a fair point, John. Okay, Chana, you want to come in?
Thanks, Convener. Just before I start, I'm saying that Martin was saying about Williams-Bay. Williams-Bay comes under Ayrshire when they're getting tested because of the doctor down there. Believe it not. Inverkip's up here in Inverclyde, and they were sent up the way because I asked about that. In fact, a girl get told to go across the water because that was the closest one to her, and then she found out she could get it in Skernley, Upper Skernley, to get her jag, and that was through a bit of telephoning. So that's it. The question, Martin, I'm asking, my wife yesterday was in the cooperative supermarket, and it had the numbers up, and I think it was 13 people were allowed in. And I know they're supposed to do this in other places, and I just wonder if they have done it and if they've checked out because obviously you get telephone calls and they tell you that certain places was like, well, we'll say Carplow at the one end the other night, and that was at Sinclair Street, where there was burning paint again, and were mobbed, and that might put this up. And it does. And you're saying about heat inside or outside. We're advised by the Scottish Government we must keep doors opened, we must have ventilation through the place, which means you can't have heating on or you'll be off your head because it's wasted, and that's to keep an airflow going. It seems to help keep this bug, we'll say a virus at bay. Surely they've got to come along. And I know reading their website at times, you start to think, I think I'll go and see the psychiatrist. And I'm not being funny when because a lot of it's contradicting. And I can assure you that you go and look at the latest one about playing music inside, and you'll come out and say, how can it work? I'm only using that as a, but even though the big supermarkets now are supposed to have how many should be in, which stops spreading this virus about. And I wonder what's happening. Now, East Wren was higher than us. They were higher than Moray, and they didn't get shut down. Now, surely to God, if we're trying to stop this, because remember, people go up and down that motorway, go to visit these places, and you don't know where you're picking it up. You're on your clothes and you're bringing it back. Surely we're working together to get this done. And it's unfair on us when we were penalised right through, and yet we've been working as a team to get it the way it is now. How can we not get this message through? We've got to work together for this virus. And if somebody breaks the rules elsewhere, they've got to turn and say, you can't do that anymore. That doesn't seem to happen. And I don't know why. Because Moray get murdered for what they had, and yet East Wren didn't. I know Glasgow's went up, and I know people went up to Glasgow and they mixed. And I think that's wrong. I think, we're working in this, we don't know what like it is. For God's sake, let's use common sense and work together. Forget the politics of it. Let's get together and make it simple for people to understand the rules. And I can assure you it isn't. And can I say, Stephen, Morton got an extra 100 people in, and it wasn't 500, it was 600 they got the other night. So there you are. But there you are, it's a wee one. Okay, but thanks for that. But Martin, seriously, what can we do about this? Because it's not good for businesses where they don't know what they've got to do, and what they've got to put up is how many people can come into their premises at one time. That's not helping them.
I hope that wasn't the fat cat corporate hospitality they squeezed in, Charlie.
What was that, Stephen?
I hope that wasn't the fat cat corporate hospitality they squeezed in, and no the real punters.
I don't know, but just they get permission for the SFA to sell another 100 tickets at the wee Dublin end, I think it was. Not even the cowshed, so there you are.
Okay. Right, Martin, you want to comment?
So in terms of capacities, I know I will be entirely honest with you and say that I'm not entirely au fait with the fine detail of the guidance, but our staff have been going round all businesses, giving them advice on capacities, particularly, I suppose, to be honest, we've been focusing over the last couple of weeks on the licensed trade for obvious reasons, because that's been opening up. But certainly I can take that back and see where we are with the likes of the supermarkets in terms of giving them advice. I'm not certain, and I'd have to come back to you on whether there is actually a requirement to display the capacity. I'll find out from the team. There are a couple of other things that Councillor Rebecca mentioned, and certainly at yesterday's member sounding board, the issue of background music came up. And I've had an update from our team on that bizarrely you are allowed background music in a pub, and it can be live background music, but the restrictions on it are such that it's almost impossible to do. So effectively, you could have somebody sitting behind a screen with an acoustic guitar, provided they sang very quietly, or you could have somebody pinkling on a piano, but that's about it, and you have to have separation between them and the staff, because I know that one or two pubs were thinking that this might be actually a backdoor to having live music, but it's actually very much more limited than that. It's one of these things that you wonder why they actually even bothered mentioning it, to be honest.
Okay.
Convener, can I just say to Martin, it's supposed to be at your door that what your capacity is, and people are supposed to have up, and I think it's at the cooperative door. I've not been out shopping, my wife has, and it was 13, which was funny. I said they should have made it 12 or 14. Okay, but thanks.
Right, Jan, thanks for that. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so are we happy to agree with the recommendations, colleagues? Yeah, I've got a thumbs up from Councillor Clougherty. That's good enough for me. Okay, moving on to item 3, finance update, including ICT strategy, digital strategy 2021 to 24. Alan's going to speak to that report.
Thank you, Convener. And as has been the case for the last couple of committees, a wide range of matters. So if members will bear with me as I run through them. The committee's own 2021 revenue budget is projecting a £686,000 underspend. The committee's own capital projects programme is on budget, but has £106,000 slippage reported in 2021. The overall general fund budget is projecting a £2.2 million surplus for 2021, which is an increase of £825,000 since the last report, and that leads to a general fund reserves balance projection of £4.445 million, which is £425,000 more than a revised 2% reserves target of £4 million. The overall capital programme for 2021 is reporting a £4.7 million or 36% acceleration, and is currently 3.75% more than the projected available reserves, which is within the 5% limit that the council sets itself over the 3-year period. Appendix 7, which is getting larger and larger, shows the latest position of the £36 million COVID funding received by the council and how it's been utilised. And after allowing for a £771,000 increase in some set aside to support IL over the next 3 years, brings the total support to IL of £4 million. This still leaves an unallocated contingency of £1.26 million. Albeit there's a report later in the agenda to allocate £500,000 of that to support the COVID recovery proposals. Appendix 8 seeks approval as part of the normal year end to create a number of earmarked reserves. Those earmarked reserves total about £11 million, mostly to do with COVID, where we're carrying money forward which has been given to the council from the Scottish Government and the UK Government of the Health Board. Approval is sought for 2 inflationary increases requested by the HSCP for elderly care inflation, and these come to £401,000. Committee's asked to approve those from the non-pay inflation contingency. Appendix 9 and 10 are the ICT and the digital strategies for the next 3 years, and members will see that Alan MacDonald is here to answer any of the questions that members may have on these 2 documents. And finally, appendices 11 to 13 contain the usual information on the 6-monthly tender information awards that have been overseen by officers. Within this, I've enhanced the information this time to include direct awards. That's awards which don't go to tender, and to include tenders over £500,000. Members don't normally receive that, so there's a bit more information than normal there. And in relation to that, if I could just introduce members to David Aiken, who's attending today. David is the replacement for Brendan Hurrell, is the new Procurement and Building Services Manager, and has joined us from Western Bartonshire Council. I've assured him today members won't be asking him any difficult questions. If you've got any procurement questions, either I'll field them, or more than likely I'll say we'll get back to you on that. But I just wanted David to observe proceedings today, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alan. As the previous item, I'm going to try and see if we can just take questions as they come. So first in is Elizabeth.
Thanks, thanks, Stephen. Two questions. I'll do them one at a time if you're happy with that.
Yeah,
the
sure.
first one, I have taken offline. I've spoken to Alan about this one, just in terms of the IJB decision that we're being asked to make. Not that I have an issue with the decision. It's just it does seem odd. And initially, when I was approaching Alan about this, it was in terms of have we had a paper about this to the IJB? And I don't think we have. You know, and I'm looking at Jim Clough and I don't think we have. And it just seems odd to me that we as a council committee are making a financial decision about a body that I'm on that I don't know that that body has asked for, if you know what I mean, other than being on this committee as well. So it's more of that kind of communication, relationship, governance structures sort of query, and I must admit it really had me a bit flummoxed. It's not even a question, is it? I'm so sorry, genuinely sorry, not actually a question, but I do think there's a bit of an issue there.
I mean, I think it's well, you're not framing necessarily a question. I think it's something that officers need to obviously comment on. I mean, if the IJB doesn't want the 401,000, we'll certainly keep it. But I mean, my understanding of the budget decisions that we took, which then had to be ratified by the IJB, was that we would provide our sort of annual funding to the IJB, but we would look at any inflationary requests and they would be considered on an individual basis. And that seems to be what we're doing. Alan, you want to come in?
Yes, as Elizabeth said, she's raised this with me offline, and I think it does raise a curious issue about the governance process, because our normal budget process is that the council determines its contribution to the IJB, which then goes to the IJB, and the IJB either accept it or don't accept it. And every year since the IJB was formed, have accepted the council's requisition offer. And that's due to the close working relationship that we have at officer level, and reports going to the CMT, the members' budget working group, etc., etc. So in these two cases, Louise Long brought reports to the corporate management team on the basis of the information that we had, both around the elderly care, home care contract, and also the care home contract information. So we are, albeit it's after the event, normally this would be dealt with before March. It's going through the normal route, but I think, you know, I totally get what has been said here, that in a perfect world, what you would end up is a request coming formally from the IJB. And you've got another item on this agenda at Inverclyde Leisure, where Inverclyde Leisure, there's a proposal here to allocate a further £771,000 to set aside that for Inverclyde Leisure over the 2020-2023 period. Again, that request hasn't formally come from the Inverclyde Leisure Board. It has come from the Chief Executive on the basis of close working with Ruth and myself to look at their business plan, etc. So I'm more than happy to look at how we can improve these matters, but there hasn't been a pattern over the last 4 years of the IJB considering reports and then formally requesting the council for money. It's normally been the case that the council, through close working relationship at officer level, has identified the need, offered the money to the IJB, and in every case the IJB has accepted it.
Presuming, Alan, this will be reported to the IJB.
Absolutely, convener. It'll need to be reported to the IJB because Louisa's report is only seeking partial contribution from the council. So the IJB needs to find the money for the balance of both inflation requests. But again, I've worked with Louise and we've identified where that money would come from, and Louise will present that to the IJB and hopefully they'll sign that.
Okay, Elizabeth, you want to come back on?
Thanks, it's really helpful. And Alan did, please don't think Alan didn't respond to me when I spoke to him offline. I know that he has responded, so thank you for all of that information. I just do think it's a bit peculiar that I'm seeing a request from a body, as I say, a body that I'm on that I didn't know we had. If you know what I mean, it's just a bit odd. If there are ways to kind of to sort of minimise that in the future, then I suppose that would be quite helpful.
Well, obviously, you and the other board members can raise it at the next
absolutely.
IGB as well, and obviously, Alan will feed it back to Louise as well and have a discussion at an officer level. Okay, you want to come in the section 10 as well, Elizabeth?
Section 10. So this is about the procurement side of things. And hello, David. It's nice to see you. But I want to ask you to answer the question. I think it probably was this equivalent meeting last year where we looked at the equivalent paper of this in terms of our contracts and how we award our contracts. And something that was taken forward was my suggestion to liaise with or I thought it had been taken forward, was to liaise with our Chamber of Commerce to maximise their role in supporting local organisations to be in a better position to tender for contracts that come through Inverclyde Council. I've not had any kind of formal feedback in terms of how those discussions have gone, where that's moved to, but again I see that there's not a lot of local presence in the contracts that we have awarded, so I'm assuming that even if we have made the actions that we said we were going to make, then they're not really bearing fruit yet. So I would like to see them bear fruit, and I'm just wondering if we can have a bit of a formal update on how that action is progressing and the work that we might still have to do for it to have impact.
Well, I suppose we have to understand that the last year has been a quite extraordinary year and presented challenges in terms of progressing things, and I suppose we're also still in the expedited business sort of scenario where we're not getting full reports around, for example, procurement. Alan, do you want to pick that question up?
Sorry, just before you come in, Alan, sorry, Stephen, can I just comment on what you said there? We have still awarded contracts though, you know, and
I understand that, but I mean, in terms of the last year of COVID and awarding contracts, you'll have seen nationally the issues around awarding contracts and the huge amount of public spending that there's been in the last year or so, and people have had to cut corners in a sense when it came to procurement as well. And I'm not saying with our officers have cut corners, but the capacity to maybe improve procurement processes, the capacity to engage with local businesses in the Chamber of Commerce during the last 12 months has just not been there. Alan?
Thank you, Convener. And yes, from what I recall, it is an outstanding remit to incorporate what we've been doing back in a procurement update to members, and it's absolutely been caught up in the issues that the conveners raised there. But I'll liaise with Stuart, and we will we'll make sure that the next procurement update includes that information. I would highlight that the members will be aware that a local contractor has been awarded about £2 million worth of school estate work since this report was written, and so that's a positive. But it did stand out at the time officers were preparing this report how few Greenock, Port Glasgow, Gordon names appeared in the column, so we were expecting the question.
Stuart, you want to come in?
For you, Convener, yes, in terms of the action which Councillor Robertson highlighted, I know that Brendan met with the President of the Chamber of Commerce at the time with a view to promoting opportunities within the Council. Alan's quite right, that hasn't been as forceful as it could have been, but I am conscious that the Chamber did have a series of breakfast meetings over the COVID pandemic, and procurement was one of the topics on the breakfast meetings. And we've continued to encourage local providers to engage through the Supplier Development Programme, which is obviously a national-based programme which is available for all members of the business community to participate within Inverclyde, but there's still work to be done.
I mean, obviously, we're hoping to get back to sort of normal business, shall we say, after the summer. So I think we could expect a fuller update around procurement and pick that particular issue up. You want to come back in, Elizabeth?
Not really. Thank you for the responses. They're really helpful in terms of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Chana, you're next.
Okay, I got an answer there, Stephen. Thanks.
You're fine with that. Okay, Chris Curley.
Yes, just a supplementary on the what do you call it, procurement issue. What I was just thinking was, obviously there's a lot of these contracts are going out, or there isn't the actual capacity within Inverclyde to do them. And looking at a few of them, I recognise that these are more specialised activities. But I was just wondering whether to put a bit of context on a future report, whether or not we can actually identify whether there is companies that could have provided that level of service within Inverclyde. It might give us a better idea about what we actually, where we actually need to, what do you call it, to be slinging the resources, because there's no point in, what do you call it, saying, well, there's 5 reports come in here, but there's for national, what do you call, competing what do you call it, competing suppliers who wouldn't be able to provide the be in Inverclyde. So, but it'd be interesting to see if there is actually, we can actually identify where there is actually companies within Inverclyde that could do these projects, and then so we can actually compare these numbers of companies. So we have a sort of headline summary, so we can see where actually there is capacity in Inverclyde to provide these services locally and where we're not actually doing so.
Okay, Stuart, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Convener, you'll be aware that we have a policy within procurement for lotting, and that does afford smaller companies the opportunity who aren't tier 1 companies to be able to participate in the tender process. But Convener, there's also the requirement that the Inverclyde companies need to be willing to participate in that process. And having gone through a tender exercise for professional services for Riverside Inverclyde, whereby I personally pleaded with 2 local companies to participate in the tender exercise, they didn't. So there has to be a recognition by members that we have a willingness to engage with local companies to participate in the procurement process, but it's not always the case that the local companies want to do it.
Okay, but we can pick Chris's point up in the future update report on procurement. Okay, Tommy, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. Question for Alan. Alan, the report, it's in various sections, it talks about significant amounts of money, but in the past you've advised us the next council is facing a £4 million deficit. Will any of these monies we're speaking about here have perhaps a positive impact on that figure in the next council, or is it still significant challenges ahead?
I think I know the answer to that question, Tommy, but Alan might want to just confirm it.
If I can, but as always, try and put some context around it. I think the important thing for members to recognise is that effectively all the COVID money is one-off funding, and as a result, it is being used on one-off things. I think the risk that comes from some of this funding is it creates an expectation and a demand that cannot be sustained when this funding runs out. And that could add to the budget pressures. So in some respects, for all the good that the COVID funding has been used for, you know, through that whole list, those pages of initiatives that the money has been spent on, if any of those initiatives are then hardwired into our revenue budget, it then adds to the revenue gap. I am finalising the financial strategy to go to the council on the 10th of June. I put that to the corporate management team, and it is identifying about a £10 million funding gap for the first year of the new council, which obviously is partly attributed to the current budget strategy of using £4 million worth of reserves next year rather than balancing the budget financially through savings, for all the right reasons that can be understood. So in short, there are major challenges for the council financially to face, and we just need to be careful that we don't add to them through the expectations that some of the COVID money will potentially raise in our community and amongst our businesses.
Okay. You want to come back in, Tommy?
Oh, that's fine, Stephen. Thanks very much, Alan.
Okay, cheers. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so are we happy to agree the recommendations, colleagues? Yeah, okay, thanks for that. Okay, we're moving on to item 4, which is the Solace Improving Local Government Benchmarking Framework 2019-20. We did have a presentation on that at 1 o'clock today, but Andrina, I think, is going to speak to the report.
Yep, thank you, convener. And yes, we had a presentation, and I'm happy to share the presentation. And a section of the presentation involved me highlighting the interactive toolkit that's available for the local government benchmarking framework. So if any elected member wasn't present and wants me to pick that up with them, I'm happy to do so following this meeting. So I will try and keep this fairly short. The local government benchmarking framework is comes out every year, normally around about February. The Improvement Service provides the report, and this year there are 91 indicators as part of the report, grouped across 9 of the service areas, which are indicated at section 5.5 of the report, covering a whole range of council services, children's services, adult social care, through to economic development, and 2 new areas that have been added for this year around financial sustainability and climate change. We currently have information, and within your Appendix 1, you have information on 73 indicators, which is out of the 91 that have already been published, and we'll look to bring a further report back around the remaining indicators once they're published. Overall, I think we're happy to say that this is a fairly positive report. Obviously, any data that we use can be interpreted in lots of different ways, so we do need to take care when interpreting data. And it is only one set of data that we have to use. However, it is national data, it is verified, and it does look to benchmark across all council areas. And I think it's helpful not simply to compare with other areas, but really to benchmark and see if we can learn, or other councils can learn from us, perhaps in areas that they've either excelling or we are. In terms of this report, you will see that in terms of progress, then in 2019-20, we have an increase in the measures that are in quartiles 1 and 2, so either within the top 8 of councils across Scotland or the top 16. So we have 50 of our indicators, 68% of our indicators are in quartiles 1 and 2, so in the top 16 of councils, and the remainder being in quartile 3 or 4. As I say, in terms of the way that you interpret the data, some of it is very much, it's easy to interpret in terms of saying what's really positive. Sometimes it's more around looking at trends over the kind of 3-year period. So as I say, we just need to take care in interpreting the data. But overall, we have moved in terms of the position in the national rankings from 2017, where we were joint 3rd for the greatest number of indicators in quartile 1 and 2, to the 2019 data, where we were 1st. So overall, a positive picture. I do want to stress that this is 1920 data. Obviously, this is pre-COVID, and I'm sure next year we may be looking at a different report, as will the rest of Scotland. So helpful to point that out. The bulk of the report actually goes into each of the service areas, the 9 service areas. I won't go into that. However, the interactive toolkit, which I showed at the presentation earlier, really brings this data to life and is very easy to use and navigate. And I would encourage anyone to go on and have a look at it and look at the data. I think it's important that we don't leave this data sitting on a shelf, and we make sure that the services are using the data, this data and other data, to really look at improvements in services and actually kind of future actions that we may want to look at. So we'll keep it fairly short and sweet. So really it's about noting progress, and as I say, I'm happy to follow up with anybody who wasn't able to be at the briefing today. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andrina. Any questions or comments, colleagues? No, we don't see anything, so we're happy to agree the recommendations. Okay. Right, that takes us on to item 5, recovery action plans. Martin, are you going to speak to that?
Yes, I will, convener. So this report is effectively to seek approval for the proposals for funding from the Council's COVID Recovery Fund, as Alan referred to earlier, and also to bring the organisational and partnership recovery action plans to the committee's attention. So Appendix 1 covers the proposals that have gone through both the CMT and the Members' Budget Working Group for spend against the Council's COVID Recovery Fund. And approval is sought from the committee for those spending proposals. If the committee is minded to approve those proposals, then the Organisational Recovery Action Plan at Appendix 2 and the Partnership Recovery Action Plan at Appendix 3 contain some of those actions. Those action plans will be centrepieces of updated recovery plans, which will be brought for approval to the next full council meeting and to the Alliance Board meeting in June. So the organisational plan coming to the 10th of June and the Partnership Recovery Plan coming to the Alliance Board on the 14th of June. Recommendations are that the committee approves the proposals for spend, and subject to that the committee approves the Organisational Recovery Action Plan and notes the Partnership Recovery Action Plan at Appendix 3. In terms of governance, it's proposed that once the plans have been approved, that we will set targets and sort of key milestones against them, and will provide regular updates and a quarterly progress report on the Organisational Recovery Plan will come to the Policy and Resources Committee commencing in September 2021, and we'll do the equivalent for the Partnership Action Plan to the Alliance Board. Happy to take any questions, or the various lead officers for the various areas in the action plans are obviously also present.
Okay, thanks for that, Martin. David, you've been very quiet today.
Is that a criticism?
No, not at all. It's always pretty welcome that you're pretty quiet. It means you're a happy man.
Yeah, we had a very good report today. Can I go to page 102? This might be for Anne. Page 102, 04.2. Committee review. What is meant by that, Anne? Report on interim committee delivery proposals and proposals for longer term format of committees.
I'll bring Alan in that.
Thank you, Convener. David, I'm putting a report to the SLF on Thursday with initial officer proposals regarding both these matters to get a steer from members. It's obviously been a desire of some members that we move to more face-to-face meetings rather than meetings like this as soon as possible. And so proposals are coming forward on it's going to cover these matters. There are various complexities involved in whatever is put forward to members, and that's why it's felt to be better having a strategic leaders forum to tease these matters out before the report goes to the full council in June.
Thank you, Alan. Can I have a supplementary, please, Convener?
Of course you can, David, yeah.
Page 104, 06.2. I'm a big fan of staff well-being. And a big fan of councillor well-being. Can somebody explain to me what the staff well-being means with regard to enhanced staff well-being plan delivered across all health and social care workforce? Might be Alan.
Or maybe Alan with 2 L's and an E and an N.
Yes.
Alan, David.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it comes to through yourself, Convener. I think everyone knows the impact that COVID has had on whatever part of our workforce you look at. As similar across the council, our care at home staff, our district nurses, our physios, we really have engaged with the staff to find out what would make a difference for your well-being. So, for instance, whether it's giving some staff in care at home a chance to meet up electronically so they can speak to some other members of the team. So it's taking the well-being, but actually to each of the teams so that we can look at bespoke. Some of the staff asked for, could you put on a session for us so we can just talk to other members of staff, because care at home staff don't see each other very often. So there's been really bespoke responses, not costing large amounts of money, but giving folk the chance to meet and talk about some of their experiences. So we've looked at that across the teams, Councillor Wilson, to make sure that there is no pocket of staff group that are feeling they've not had that opportunity to contribute to the move forward in terms of wellbeing. So it's really about making sure we're giving each of the staff groups an opportunity to say what would make a difference for their wellbeing, so they can come to work and feel as if they're getting that support that's required to do a difficult job. I don't have to tell you how hard it is to go in every day and give personal care to somebody. And during COVID, the staff have seen all sorts of situations. So it's just about making sure we're giving each of the staff groups that enhanced opportunity. What is it that would help you to be at work and get through COVID?
In my case, very little, but thank you very much for that, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, Ronnie.
Thanks, Stephen. It's just a very, very general question from me, and it's Appendix 1. And it's the ECS3, the launch of the new sports strategy. And for obvious reasons, it's something that I'm pretty interested in. And I know that we've been trying to do this for some considerable time. And I understand that we're on the verge of doing that. But I just wonder how up to date that will be, because in the last week or so, I've been reading quite a lot about sport in general. And Dr. Chris McIntosh basically is a policy advisor to the Select Committee on Grassroots Community Sport. It's a guy I know quite well. And basically what he's saying nowadays is that young people are less interested in sports playing in schools. They're more interested in social and enjoyable activities. And basically all over Scotland, I think it's no any great surprise, but all over Scotland, sports centres are being scrapped because experts are now claiming that they don't help boost physical activities. So I just wondered how up to date our strategy will be when we eventually publish it. And, you know, if it's going to be up to date to include basically some of the latest theories on community sport. Thanks.
Ruth, you want to pick that up?
Well, I had an update on it yesterday morning from the team, and so as in regards to consultation with clubs, it will be bang up to date, because I know we're still waiting for some of the clubs to communicate and to get back to us. I haven't heard that particular piece of research, so I can look into that, and I can look at the team and make sure that it is as up to date as possible. What I would say is that we've been working with Sport Scotland, and in particular they have put a renewed emphasis on inclusion to make sure that any sporting activities are as inclusive as possible. So I know we have revised some of what we're looking at to make sure that it is inclusive, including some of the work that's taking place about gender-based safety as well when people are out exercising. I can look at the particular research, if you've got a copy of it, it would be welcomed, around the particular buildings. But what I would also say is about sports halls, you've got to balance that with the fantastic amenities we've got in our schools as well, and that our schools have got gyms and very good sporting facilities. So I wonder if there's a balance to be struck there.
Ronnie, you want to come back on?
Just very briefly, Stephen, if you don't mind. Yeah, I'm happy to provide the reports, Ruth. I'll dig them out and send them to you. But, you know, the point that I'm making is that that really we now have to think outside the box, because the reality is that young people now are moving away more from conventional sports as we know them. In fact, you know, in areas of deprived areas of multiple deprivation, the last thing people will do is pay for leisure, you know, when they're struggling to pay bills. And that's now being accepted, I think, nationally. So ultimately, you know, when you can bring in fun sports, then that really lights young kids fire, and that's, I think, the way that we should be going. But yeah, that's fine. I mean, I know it's still being developed, but I'm happy to share any of the information I've got. And if you want me to have a look at some stuff, I'm happy to do that. Okay, thanks.
I mean, I think the reality is lots of our strategies will probably be reviewed and evolve due to COVID. I mean, we are still in a sense in the midst of COVID, although thinking about recovery, and the likelihood is, but that'll take a few years, and I would imagine that the sports strategy and many other strategies will evolve over time. Elizabeth, you want to come in on this point?
Thanks, Channel, and I'm leapfrogging you, but this is just a follow-up on Ronnie's point, so thanks for bringing me in, Stephen. I had thought that when we were reviewing the strategy, we were making it a sport and physical activity strategy anyway, so it would be even just kind of good to have it named thusly, you know what I mean, so that we don't lose sight of that, because I think it's not really new information. We kind of know that the key to better health outcomes for Inverclyde is going to be largely in terms of cracking physical activity and strategising that a bit more, much more than sport, which is always going to be a subset of that in the Venn diagram. But I had thought that we'd kind of made peace with the notion of it being a sport and physical activity strategy a wee while back.
Ruth?
Yes, we have. Apologies if that hasn't made it into that. It is sports and physical activity strategy. So that is the title of it.
It's just a wee abbreviated version to fit it into the spreadsheet. But
Stephen, ER2 on the same page in Appendix 1, actually, I think Elizabeth does refer to that. It says investment in council parks to encourage outdoor activity rather than sports. So maybe we're covering it somewhere else. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Chana, you want to come in?
Thanks, convener. Regarding the 109, page 109, and it's ECS 3.3, and it's about tourism. Now, the Pipe Band Championships will be starting up again, all going well. If they don't, then it'll be the same as this year, they'll cancel a lot of stuff. And very shortly, they'll be looking for people at the council to see if they're interested. Now, I think we should actually have this try and get it back again. And the other thing is we could do is tie up with a liner when it's in, so that we encourage the people on there to come down to that, get money off them. And I think there should be a charge for this as well. Might not be a big charge, but there's also different spin-off that you could go into to raise some money out of it. And I think it'd be daft if we don't take this opportunity just now, because you know exactly what's going to happen. In America, they'll be over once they see it's the tartan week or no, the rest of it, and they're back in Scotland. And if we can get them down there spending some money and promoting the place, that would be a great thing. I think a pipe band would promote it. I know what happened before, and I know there are people talking about it even yet. And the same in America. I'm still in contact with people over there, and it was all through these things. So I just feel myself, this would be a good one, more so under that remit, to turn around and see how we can promote Inverclyde. And I think that'd be one of the best ones going, because even people locally get pride and listen to a pipe band and seeing the kilts and all the different tartans and hearing different people speak, and it brings people together. And I've spoke to some of the people. There's a new committee up in the pipe band, and I've spoke to one or two of them, and they'd be interested because they think the Battery Park is even better than the ground at Glasgow Green for the World's Championship. And all the pipe bands before are desperate to come back. Now, what we do is we could put in for it 1 year with the option of other 2 if we had the money. And that would be the sort of deal, because I think most other places are the same right now, tight for money. I'm talking about councils, tight for money. So that wouldn't be a sort of brick round your neck that you had something like that. And I think they would accept. I think they would be accepting those conditions. I think they would, and I think it'd be a good promotion. You know. So I don't know how the rest of people feel, but I know how I feel. And I've got a funny name. It's right Scottish name. Here, here.
Okay, Chana, we'll
thanks for that.
Ask George to have a look at that. George, you want to come in?
Through you, convener. Councillor Rebecca's absolutely spot on. As the pipe bands love Battery Park, think it's a fantastic venue. You'll be aware that we've put bids in previous years for major championships. They haven't been successful because other areas have managed to offer, I suppose, a longer term deal with them. All of the major championships have been cancelled right up to the Worlds this year. But we've got a really good relationship with the Pipe Band Association because of the Guruk Highland Games. I'm happy to have that conversation with them to see whether there is an opportunity to bring one of the majors to Inverclyde at some point. I don't think we'd get the Worlds, but there's potentially other opportunities out there.
Okay, so George will follow that up, Jana.
Can I ask, is everybody quite happy with that though? Because, you know, I don't want people saying no and yes. You know, if the feeling is that this is the way we should go forward, convener, then I'll pass over and I've got on to George and always
happy. Personally, I wouldn't pay to watch a pipe band, but at the end of the day, I know there's lots of you would, so it's definitely something worth exploring.
Thanks very much, convener.
You really need to get more sophisticated, Stephen.
Yeah, absolutely. Just standing there listening to pipe bands, I can absolutely a joy. Right. Any other questions or comments from colleagues?
Even if I could
John, you want to come in?
Yes, that's lovely, thank you. It's really just to give my backing to what Jano has suggested there. Really looking at a kind of plan B should everything fall flat on any applications. And the battery park has been used for many live music festivals. And we're just wondering if we should be looking at maybe going down the folk scene and having, say, a large folk festival based at Inverclyde.
George, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think generally we're open to all offers. One of the challenges is about making sure that we're not competing with other activity in the area. So obviously up in Glasgow, they've kind of cornered the market with Celtic connections. So we kind of try to avoid going for events that have a large presence somewhere else. So happy to look at every option to see what's out there and see if we can get more people into Discover Inverclyde.
Recognise the event in Glasgow, Celtic Connections, which I used to go up to quite a lot, but I don't think that we'll be holding any festivals in January though.
I mean, I think what we're looking at obviously is sort of some sort of festival May, June next year, and in principle we're agreeing that and to allocate funding. And George is open to suggestions as to what shape or form that would take. So if anybody's got any other good ideas, just feed them into George.
Yeah, and I'm sure like Councillor McCrae went up to Celtic Connections at some point in Glasgow, something like Celtic.
No. Okay, no other questions. So we agree on the recommendations, yeah? Okay, that takes us on to our last item, item 6, anti-poverty fund proposals, and Ruth is going to speak to that.
Okay, thank you. So this is the proposals for the anti-poverty interventions for 21-23. If I can draw your attention to paragraph 4.6, and just to say that these proposals have been drawn together with communication with the communities, not specifically a round of listening events, speaking to people who have either been affected by poverty or people who are working directly with those who have been. And we got a lot of very rich information out of those listening events to take these proposals forward. If I take you now to paragraph 5.1, the first thing we are looking at is creating a team leader post to monitor this, which is a 0.6 dedicated team leader. And then 5.2 outlines the governance arrangements which will be in place linked to the anti-poverty steering group. I'm not going to go through all the interventions, but 5.3 to 5.12 are an overview of all the different types of interventions, and there's a balance there. We very much hope between the support, direct support, and also building up resilience across Inverclyde. 5.13 basically points out that this pot of money is not working in isolation. There are lots and lots of other initiatives, very significant initiatives that the council already puts towards anti-poverty funding and supporting people living in poverty. 5.14 also points out that depending on the direction of the Scottish Government and some of their policy initiatives, that the longer term sustainability has to be considered in the light of what may happen in the future with the Scottish Government. And it also highlights, for instance, the fact that we have a more generous policy for allocating free school meals. And as that gets widened, the members will want to consider how to link their own initiatives alongside those of the Scottish Government. 5.15 points out that we haven't spent all the money. We've left a little bit in contingency there because, of course, as we develop these initiatives, other things and good ideas will come to light. So what are we asking for here? We're asking for you to approve the proposals set out in section 5 and also to via £80,000 from the welfare reforms budget to the anti-poverty budget. We're asking for you to know that we will come up with further proposals to utilise the remaining funds, that we will give you regular updates on how things are progressing and the impact of the investment, bearing in mind that sometimes the impact will not be immediate and it can be longer term. And then D also asks you to note that basically these are going to have to be considered in the larger policy context going forward over the next few years and linking into the budget. All of the officers who've been involved in the development of this are on the call and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks for that, Ruth. Before I bring members in, I have to chastise Councillor Wilson for just sending me an email in the middle of a committee meeting and distracting me from it. And could you pay attention to the business of this committee, please, Councillor Wilson?
Certainly, boss.
Okay, Jim, you want to come in first?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It's just to make a comment, and I'm sure it's one that will resonate with a lot of my fellow councillors. It's on 5.3 on employment for drug addiction and alcohol addiction, over £1 million. We've just heard that, I mean, we know that Inverclyde is one of the worst areas in Scotland, and we know that Scotland is the worst area in Europe. And I think when people ask us as councillors what you're doing, you can point to initiatives like this, which isn't cheap, which is an intense initiative over these next 2 years to see if we can get some resonance with that peer group, with being able to highlight that you can go off drugs or alcohol and you can make a life for yourself. And I think it's very important for us to, as councillors, to realise it's not a cheap option. But for us, doing nothing would make us culpable of just looking at the despair that we see in our streets every day. And we know, if we did need any evidence, we know that even within the last week, we had a few deaths in Inverclyde as well. So this initiative can't come quick enough. We know it's one of these, we're trying this. We know there's no guarantees of success in this, but at least by putting in this money and having this high intensity intervention, it has got a chance to work. So it's really to commend Stuart and his team and Louise and his team and Ruth for the partnership working they've done in this and bringing us to elected members. And hopefully we can see that this is definitely something that we should all get behind. It might not be the most sexiest project in the world. It might not be something that a lot of people in Inverclyde will resonate with, but for us as elected members, I think we know it's something that we've got to actually do. Thanks, convener.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Robert, you want to come in?
Aye, sorry to say, convener, Jim stole my thunder a wee bit, but I mean, I agree 100% what he's saying, because I've been sitting in Alcohol with partnership for the last 3 years, and the strategy that come before you is constant. but we never seem to do anything. And we're always turning looking for excuses to blame somebody. This is a fantastic initiative from Inverclyde Council, who at last are doing something of this tragedy and the drug issues we have here in Inverclyde. And I, for one, fully endorse this move. I brought this up at Cosla as well. Anytime people ask me for opinion, I'm not shy in giving it. I think for the last 3-4 years, we've copied and pasted our way in oblivion. This is a real substantial piece of work which is going to, hopefully, we might not see the end result. Some of us might not, because you'll probably not know about 2 years. But what I would say, during this period we employ these 3 people, that we keep them under close scrutiny, so we know exactly what's happening. So if it is going to be working out good or fail in 2 years' time, we'll know before that. We can look at this, how they're progressing every 6 months, I would imagine. So we keep up to date on the strategy and not be another cut and copy and paste report that gets put in the back burner, you never hear of it again. It's a good strategy, it's a way forward, but we have to keep on top of the people who are employed to do this piece of work and make sure they're delivering on it. Because as Jim said, it's not this is a sum of money, but for goodness sake, we have to do something. And this is a start we've all been waiting on. And I feel endorse this employment initiative.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Elizabeth, you want to come in?
I do here to both what Jim and Robert have said, couldn't agree more. I'm going to apologise profusely because I really should have declared interests for this paper in terms of being a board member of the trust and being a board member of Financial Fitness. And I'm just wanting to check, because we are making financial decisions about both those organisations, if it's okay for me to still be around at this point, or if I need to know. And apologies for bringing it in at this late stage.
Personally, I don't think you're a direct financial beneficiary, given you're a board member. So I don't think you need to.
That's okay. That's good.
To be part of the meeting.
Yes, thank you, Councillor McCabe. I was just going to say the same thing to Councillor Robertson. Thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to double check and not do the wrong thing, albeit late in the day. The comment that I've got is really about the food insecurity side of things, 5.6. And it's more of it is definitely a comment. There's not really a question here, so don't wait for one. It's about the culture that we have. And I don't imagine we're unique in terms of it, but it is definitely a culture that we have where an organisation locally, any organisation locally, does something new or successful, something sexy and fantastic, and then 3 or 4 other organisations want to replicate it and do the same thing. So then what happens is we have a bit of an implosion where there's 4 or 5 different organisations looking for or chasing the same pots of money to try and replicate the same work that each other are doing. And I guess we are quite pivotal as an organisation in terms of setting a culture and supporting the third sector in how they do things. And I'm wondering what we can do to try and make sure that where we're talking about things like food insecurity and the pantry really being one of the most successful things that's happened in the area for a very long time, that we don't fall into that trap of having an Inverclyde implosion where all of a sudden 3 or 4 other organisations are trying to do the same thing and falling after the same money, and therefore none of them are able to sustain their success. So it isn't really a question, but it's a bit of a moan. Thanks for letting me have that wee therapy session there. And if anybody's got any kind of comments on how we can avoid things being really tricky in terms of sustaining something that is really good, then that would be helpful.
I mean, I think my view would be it's to learn the lessons from the Financial Inclusion Partnership, where we did have years of organisations competing with each other until we sort of brought them together under an umbrella, and we found a way of people working together to complement each other. And I think in terms of the lessons from the pandemic and the sort of the organisations and groupings we've set up, I think that's the sort of model that we want to look at. I think it is important to bring Ruth in that particular point.
Yeah, I absolutely get the point that when people start competing for little pots of funding, it becomes you dilute the overall impact, and we have to be very wary of that. But the counterbalance of that is that there is also lots of grassroots organisations that spring up and do very good work. So it's getting that balance. Working with CVS, absolutely having the overview of all the organisations that happen. But I think probably with the pantry, we have said, okay, here is what we are funding. We've stuck to one, and we've stuck to one organisation, and they were the ones who were best set up to do the pantry. And I think it's sometimes having the courage of your convictions. And I'm talking about elected members and officers, to say this is in place, it's already happening, that's where we're going. We're not going to start almost a funding war for everything. But I do get the point that the second we do that, it begins to dilute the impact. Can I also comment on a little bit on 5.3 as well? And just to say that the employment initiative is built by Stuart on something that has already been founded, and actually it's Stuart's drive to take an initial project forward and to build on the successes of that and learn that has actually brought us to this stage here. So perhaps just to commend him through the committee as well for actually coming with this proposal, because it was well thought out and it also had some experience behind it.
Okay, Stuart, you want to come in?
Stephen, it would be wrong to take all credit for that, because Louise and I chatted about this over a year ago. We recognise that the cost to society for the individuals who are affected by this is significant. In 2019, Audit Scotland indicated that people with drug problems cost an estimated £827,000 over the course of their lifetime. And what we're trying to do with this programme is break the cycle, and it's as simple as that. It's going to be hard going. We know that from the programme that Ruth referred to that we did within schools, it was hard going and it was heart-wrenching. But if we can make a difference for this cohort, then it will save us as a society, hopefully, a significant amount of money. And I mean, with alcohol and drug harm, it's estimated that 32 billion is lost in productivity across the UK. So with these kind of figures, we really do hope that we have success with this.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Tommy, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks very much, Stephen. I absolutely endorse Councillor Clotty and Councillor Moran's comments on that. But I think, as we know, poverty, crime, drugs are all interlinked. And I think in an ideal world, we would hope to deal with individuals before they get to the stage that we're talking about in 5.3. And I think, and it's just a suggestion for officers, I know they're going to bring other proposals forward. If we could intervene prior to that section, that area, then I don't know whether we take on additional drug and alcohol support workers or whatever, but I think just ask officers if they would consider to put something in place of that to prevent further problems down the line. But it's a good initiative and I totally support it.
Okay, thanks, Tommy. Ruth, you want to come back in on that?
Yes, just to say that will be considered, I suppose, specifically with the drugs and alcohol. I don't know if Alan's got anything to add to that, but some of the initiatives, Tommy, in this, for instance, some of the family support initiatives, looking at the whole family, with especially around the social workers, are already looking at the earlier interventions around families in crisis that can lead to this. And certainly looking at younger people as well. And some of the work Stuart's doing already is looking at that bridge post school. So there's some of it is there already, but certainly if there's any further initiatives, I know that that's something that the team will keep their eye on.
Okay, thanks, Ruth.
Okay, any other comments, colleagues? No? Okay, are we happy to agree with the recommendations? Okay, right, that's the end of the business. So thank you very much for your attendance and your participation, and thanks to officers for all their work as well. So take care and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.